Hey friends, welcome back to Lemonaid. I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from. But before we get into this, I just want to acknowledge the huge gap since the last episode. And if you've been following my content, you'll know that I've been in a series of transition. Very busy making lemonade from some of life's lemons, lots of moving pieces. But perhaps that's why this episode also feels like the right one to come back with. Because Lemonaid, it was never created from a place of having life perfectly figured out. It was created from the reality that all of us experience in different seasons where we're adapting, rebuilding, or just trying to find meaning in the messy middle. And somewhere along the way, I got swept up in the summer of sports, which just was incredible. Was very special out here in the States. I live in New Jersey, which is also 5 minutes from New York. So between the Knicks and the FIFA World Cup, and then we had July the 4th afterwards and in between, it just became this incredible, beautiful tapestry of celebration. Somehow I became completely invested in sports, being in multiple chat groups and really just revolving my life around the World Cup. I mean, who am I? That was never me. I've always enjoyed football, but I've never been that person who organises my life around the tournament. But there was something very special unfolding. It wasn't just on the pitch. It was also everything happening around it too. Of course, we had the fans that poured in from all over the world. It was just beautiful. Somebody referenced it on Instagram. How did they describe it? Sleepover with the cousins you don't get to see because your parents don't get along, which I thought was quite funny because it's weirdly accurate too. Football, it just kept pouring out all these stories, ones that I feel like we need to share and just spend some time unpacking. So over the next 3 episodes, I'd love to invite you onto a continuation of the World Cup journey. Like many of you, life has shifted since the tournament ended, but we can keep going because there are moments that were just phenomenal. And there were lots of pearls of wisdom that we can take away from this sport too. It is called a beautiful game, and I can see why now, because it's just full of human stories. Stories of hope and heartbreak and sacrifice and sportsmanship. There were just so many takeaways, and I'm sure for you too. So that's what this mini-series is about. It's about stories and strategy and soul. Of course, that is the essence of everything at Lemonaid. In the first episode, we'll talk about the stories that shape the tournament and what they reveal about identity and unexpected paths that our life could take. And in the second episode, we'll look at the World Cup and what it teaches us about strength. Not just physical strength or competitive success, but how to bounce back and what leadership looks like, quality leadership, what character can do under pressure. And for the final episode, one of the most striking themes that came through, for me at least, the prevalence of faith. It was so obvious that athletes were invested in that part of their life across different teams from different cultures, and I just think that's worth talking about. So whether you're a lifelong football fan or not, this is not really about the sport itself. It's about everything that happened in between, about people and about the human stories, the choices we make and the wisdom that we can discover through some of life's biggest moments. And in a world where so much of what we see can feel divided, well, this tournament, it offered something different. Connection, unity and joy. So grab your cup, settle in, and let's just soak up some of the World Cup wisdom. So I've been thinking, what is it that made this World Cup so special? Yes, there was incredible football and some unforgettable goals, surprise outcomes, and moments of just pure magic. The fact it was hosted here in the US, for one thing, had us all concerned to some degree. We all know what's been happening, and it could have gone in one of 2 ways, but somehow this whole tournament just came together in its own weird and wonderful way. Complete strangers started bonding, and communities that wouldn't normally engage started blending, and all of a sudden we're all living in this bubble of World Cup 2026. We had the sounds from cafes in Cairo to the pubs of London, just making their way across the US. And what unfolded was what can happen when you have shared experiences. A reminder that sport has this unique ability to bring people together from different backgrounds and beliefs and beyond borders. We were all invested in the same story, no matter where we came from. We cheered, we cried, we celebrated. And perhaps that's the real legacy of this tournament, because the world has become so divided, but this one tournament just somehow reminded us of what it feels like to connect billions of people around the world and to live in tangible joy. We experienced that glimpse of what can happen when the world actually comes together. And that was unforgettable. And what we also saw was that the heroes of the tournament were the underdogs. Most of us know what it feels like to be underestimated, to have to start again, to keep going when no one sees the effort behind the scenes, and to wonder whether the thing we're working towards will ever come to fruition. Over the past few years, my own life has taken me through an incredible season of transformation. There have been changes that I chose and some that I didn't. And along the way, I found myself asking some big questions, such as, what's next? What's my purpose? Where's home? Growing up, I was always described as a dreamer. And sometimes that was said as a compliment, and other times, perhaps not. But I have always believed that dreams are where possibilities begin. And after taking the scenic route, which I shared more about in episode 2, I eventually began starting to step into parts of that dream. At the age of 35, I went to drama school and started entering the arts. And then after 40, I moved to America and just started doing my life here. And honestly, this tournament's been a masterclass in storytelling, because behind every journey, for example, there are struggles and sacrifices, hardship and heartache, yet there's hope, and that really resonated. For me, stepping onto a screen and moving to the US defied convention, and choosing to pursue my dreams came at a cost. I was single, self-employed, didn't know anybody here. I sponsored myself through the whole green card process, and I left behind everything that I had built back in the UK. And the funny thing about dreams is that although my dreams still exist, the foundations that I'm building them on are different. Everything's changed, the world has changed, the industry has definitely changed, especially since COVID came along. The way that stories are shared, created, and even discovered, it's totally different. So as somebody that still carries those creative aspirations, there have been moments where I've questioned my own path. Like, am I doing the right thing? Is this right? But what I've come to realize is that you have to make the best of what you have. And that's why turning lemons into lemonade means something to me. My dreams, they had to change a little bit based on what was happening around me. I still carry those same dreams, but today it's all about storytelling with more depth, because I have lived life in a whole different way. It's about creating conversations that connect people, help others feel less alone in their struggles and through the messy middle of life. I also firmly believe that there is a season where we do get squeezed through that pain. We become refined, our characters get crafted, and the disappointments, they're there to teach us something. We've seen that through some of this tournament. I just want you to know that if you're in a crushing season where you're being pressed, your story's not over yet. We've just seen nations who were underestimated and players who were overlooked, quietly and tenaciously working towards their dreams. And those stories remind us that our current circumstances are not the final chapter. Every story has a season of preparation before the breakthrough happens. Well, we know there are decades of sacrifice and struggle that go before that. And that's where true success lies. So that's what I'd like to dive deeper into with the Citrus Chronicle. Now, I live near the MetLife Stadium, one of the major venues for this tournament, practically on my doorstep here in New Jersey. And one of the things I loved most about where I live is the diversity. Stories began thousands of miles away. In fact, hardly anybody's actually born in this neighborhood. So when the World Cup arrived, it felt personal. The world was landing on our doorstep, and we were here to receive people that had traveled for miles to come through borders. And would they get through? We didn't know. But something beautiful happened, because instead of barriers, we saw bridges. There was something so moving about watching people come together and unite in a country called the United States of America to support teams from countries they may never have even visited, but somehow felt connected to. And even if somebody wasn't a football fan, it was hard not to get swept up in the energy. So much of what we consume can leave us feeling divided or focused on separation. And let's be honest, America was an unusual choice to host the World Cup, especially as a country that doesn't really watch or follow British football. And I think during this tournament, we got to see them invest in the American team, and the feel of FIFA was contagious. People wanted to be a part of something. Flags appeared everywhere. Jerseys were worn around like confetti. Parks and community spaces filled up. The friendships that were formed between different cultures who couldn't even speak the same language. There's this multifaceted cultural identity where people are usually from somewhere else and they just happen to have landed here for whatever reason. And there's beauty in that. And then, of course, there's the American culture itself, which does have a lot of heart. This tournament created moments of shared joy, belonging, and fun. I love seeing the World Cup through the lens of people discovering new things, fans learning about cultures they'd never experienced, and traditions that were not their own. As somebody who's moved countries myself later in life, I noticed those stories differently. And I understand in my own way what it feels like to leave somewhere familiar and build a life in a new land, to carry pieces of different places with you at the same time. Because belonging is not always as simple as having just one place you call home. Sometimes home is the place you came from and the place you're building. The story stretches across borders and continents. It's shaped by different cultures, and those chapters all become part of who you are. And that's what this tournament reminded me of too. Our differences make our stories richer. We saw Koreans in Texas embracing the barbecue, Japanese fans cleaning stadiums after matches and being consoled by Brazilians in defeat. We saw other people just celebrating the row in Times Square from Norway and all around America. Curiosity replaced criticism, and perhaps that's also one of the greatest gifts of sport. We start seeing people, stories of families and players who have gone through the depths of despair to find hope. But as we discovered, those stories behind those teams and the players, they challenged expectations. We were all invested. Communities, they carried pride, and players who had spent years preparing got to experience some of that. This tournament, those underdogs became the heroes, because when people exceed expectations, we often recognize pieces of our own story in that too. Behind every jersey is a person, and behind every flag is a community. The world might be made up of different languages and experiences, but connection is still possible when we choose one another. It was one of the most powerful human experiences I've ever felt, and I didn't even get to go to the games in real life. I just saw them on a screen out here. The moments that stay with us are not always the final results, although that was quite impactful in this particular tournament too. But there are lessons that we can also carry forward to challenge the way that we see ourselves and treat other people. This tournament was filled with reminders that a person's current situation is rarely the full story. We all have choices in how we show up. There were teams that arrived without being the favourites, and somehow they were also the stories that captured our hearts. Cape Verde was one of those, reminding us that rankings and predictions and labels don't always tell the full story. One of the things I enjoyed watching in this tournament was this passing of the torch from stars such as Messi, Ronaldo and Neymar, representing an extraordinary era of football that inspired millions around the world, and how their journeys reminded us what dedication, talent and longevity can create. And then we saw this new generation emerging with different values like Haaland and Bellingham, Kobarsi and others that reminded us of endings that create spaces for new beginnings, because every generation has its own stories to tell and every person has chapters that are waiting to unfold. And then there was, of course, Vizinha himself, whose journey challenged another assumption that society often places on people, one I could definitely relate to. We live in a world that is obsessed with youth, and that applies to my industry too. But there's something powerful about people who stay committed and continue learning and showing up, because sometimes we become so focused on what's next that we forget to honour the people that have already demonstrated resilience, experience and wisdom just through their years on the planet. And Vizinha reminded us of that. He began his journey at the age of 25, I think. And it's a story that all of us could take something from. It's a lesson that many of us needed to hear because life doesn't always unfold according to our timeline. We spend so much of our lives making plans, mapping out careers, relationships, dreams and ambitions, and we imagine how things should look. But then life happens. Doors open, doors close. And sometimes we find ourselves wondering whether we've fallen behind or missed that moment. But in this tournament, I was reminded that we shouldn't confuse a season with the whole story. A delay doesn't mean the dream has disappeared, and I have to remind myself that too at times, because I have my own dreams that haven't come to fruition, but I also have hope. And with hope, there are possibilities. That's why the underdogs resonate so deeply, because somewhere inside those stories, we recognize ourselves, what it feels like to work when nobody's watching, how to prepare for opportunities that haven't arrived yet, and the weight of carrying dreams that feel delayed or uncertain. The world sees the breakthrough and the celebration, but behind every visible success are years of preparation, hardship in football, in businesses, and also in life generally. At 17, I dreamed of working in media and telling stories. I imagined a very specific version of what that could look like, but life took me through unexpected chapters. I navigated uncertainty and experienced moments where I questioned whether I was still moving in the right direction. And when I look back, I can see that every experience was shaping the storyteller that I am today. Those dreams have not disappeared, but they've deepened. The experiences, the challenges, the unexpected plot twists that became part of my story are content that I now share with all of you. Sometimes the very things that we wish we could change become the things that give us something meaningful to offer others. The messy middle, it's not wasted time. It's where we discover what truly matters. So, for anyone listening today who feels overlooked or uncertain about what life has got in store for them, try not to confuse your current chapter with the final destination. Just keep learning, growing and showing up, because the journey does matter. I know it sounds cliche, but you don't know what you're preparing for yet. Sometimes you might think that you have the dream, but the dream could be bigger than anything you could imagine. So let's move into the sip and pour, where we do some coaching around some of the stories that have shaped us. And as I reflect on this World Cup and everything that made it so memorable, I kept coming back to one idea, that every person, every team and every country carries a story, and we often see the final results when everything comes together. But behind every person standing on that stage is a journey and chapters that really had to craft character and resilience. We're all shaped by where we come from, by the people who influenced us, the challenges we've overcome, the experiences that changed us, and how we view ourselves in the world, the countries we're born in, the places we have lived, the communities we've become a part of along the way. I know this personally from moving my life from the UK to America as somebody that grew up in an Indian family, learning how to build a new home while still carrying the chapters that shaped me. I've brought those experiences with me. And they've become part of my story here. So today, I want to offer a simple reflection framework called Roots, a reminder that understanding where we come from can help us understand where we're going. So remember your roots. What's shaped us? Who are we? Our roots are not just our accomplishments. They're the stories behind them, the relationships and values that have helped us become who we are today. And sometimes we spend so much time looking ahead that we forget to honor the journey that brought us here. And then there's the O. Own your story. Every person carries a story, but not every story follows the timeline that we expected. Maybe your career has changed direction like mine. Maybe your relationships have changed and chapters that you wouldn't have chosen, but ones that still matter. There's the danger of comparing our journey with somebody else's highlight reel. But your story is not less valuable just because it looks different. Which leads me to the second O. Open yourself up, because one of the most beautiful things about this tournament was watching people discover cultures beyond their own. Fans learning things they'd never experienced, communities that connected over new paths that had formed. Something was being shared, and connection, it often begins with curiosity. So when we approach people with a lens of wanting to understand instead of wanting to be right or to judge, something powerful can open up, because beneath those differences, we have the same basic requirements. We wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard. And then the T is tell your story, because you have experiences that are valuable. For many years, I wanted to tell stories because I was fascinated by what shaped people, their choices, their challenges, their turning points, and moments that nobody else saw. Your story might not be as big as Haaland or Bellingham or whoever else, but you don't know who's being encouraged because of what you've gone through. The S, stretch beyond your borders. Growth often happens when we step outside of our comfort zone, and the World Cup reminded us that life becomes richer when we learn from one another. Sometimes the biggest barriers are not physical, they're the mental blocks, the fears that we hold on to, and the stories that we tell ourselves. The invitation today is simple. Remember where you came from, own the story you're living, stay open to the people and the experiences that expand you, and share what you've learned. Be willing to step beyond what feels familiar, because our roots matter. So at this point, I share something just a little bit more personal, because as I reflected on why this World Cup connected with me so deeply, I had to ask myself, but why? It was more than just what I've shared so far. I realised it took me back to my childhood. I grew up with 4 maternal uncles, and for much of my childhood, they all lived together in this crazy, chaotic house that was my grandparents'. And whenever we visited, it was just a storm of activity. There was noise, food, conversation, several of them all happening at the same time. And my grandma, she was very much the centre of that household. She ruled the roost, and everybody knew it. If my uncle slept in for too long, she would send us up as young grandchildren to go and jump on their beds and wake them up, which you can imagine we thought was hilarious. But I'm not entirely sure if my uncles felt quite the same way. Somewhere in the middle of all that family chaos, there was usually a battle over the TV. My grandma wanted her Bollywood films. More often than not, Match of the Day would win. The debates, the opinions, the passionate discussions, they would fill the room every time we would go to visit. And although I didn't necessarily watch football back then or enjoy it, I remember absorbing those stories. And one of my uncles in particular, he was football mad. He did not just watch, he lived and breathed football. He was the chief organiser, the planner for all the tournaments, the person that would coordinate trips with his brothers and my dad. They could go and watch the big games. As children, we'd listen and hang on to the stories from Italy 1990 and South Africa and wherever else they went watching the games. I even got to go myself one year. It was pure bliss. I mean, I got my ticket by default because somebody else missed their flight. Yeah, I have lived through several football stories and experiences connected to it. I think that's why it was so deep for me. And I guess one of the deeper layers to me in this World Cup is that my life has changed significantly from before I left England. Geographies have changed, families have shrunk, and some of the people that I've spoken about are no longer here. That household that I grew up visiting, it changed quite quickly once I arrived. My grandparents are sadly no longer here. Those 2 uncles in that same house are no longer here. And really that whole household has disappeared. And what used to be a place that I guess we took for granted as young children, it's become a precious memory. I think part of what that tournament has done for me is just reconnect me to some of those memories and reminded me of conversations that no longer happen with people who are no longer here, and stories I wish I could hear just one more time. And as I've watched fans arrive from all over the world this summer, I couldn't help but think about how much my uncles and my dad would have loved it out here, how many stories they would have brought back home. And I think about my late uncles in particular and how much they would have loved seeing New York and New Jersey come to life with the football. And that's what surprised me most, is that somewhere along the way, this tournament became about family. It became a bridge between my old life and my new one, between England and America, between childhood memories, family dynamics, and the future that I'm now building out here alone. And it reminded me that sometimes the things that move us most are not really about the thing itself, it's about what it represents. And for me, the World Cup represented connection to remind me about just how important it is to keep going even when it's hard. The values that tournament gave us have shaped moments for many people all over the world. For all of the different threads that we've seen unfold through the World Cup, I feel like it's taught me a lot about courage, perseverance, and the kind of person I want to be. I think it's in those moments when we're feeling crushed and we're really squeezed by life that sometimes we don't become our best version. So I just want to encourage you to give yourself some grace, because you're only human, but to also try and take some wisdom from the experience of how to show up better, how to approach life through the wisdom from people that are no longer here and people who are still in our lives. Your character will be tested under pressure, especially when expectations are high and decisions have to be made. The strength that it takes to just keep going and to find that resilience to stay on track. It's not easy to pay attention to the small things that move your heart and not your head necessarily, moments that make you pause, because those memories will resurface in the future, and the experiences that stir something deeper within you, because it's often in those moments where we're being brought closer to our purpose. For me, this World Cup, it started with football, but it ended up being so much more. It reminded me of where I came from. I'm so grateful for those squeezes, because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be who I am today. And I'm sure that's the same for many of you. So whatever lemons life is giving you, just know that lemonade is waiting to be poured out through the other side. Today, we've explored the stories that go beyond borders, cultures and communities, and moments that remind us of our shared humanity. And in the next episode, I want to take you somewhere just a little bit deeper. We'll look at what happens when the pressure rises, the moment character is tested, expectations are high, and we have to decide how we want to show up. We'll also explore the shape of strength, not just physical strength or the ability to win, but emotional strength, resilience and leadership. Because true strength is not only measured by what we achieve, but who we become along the way. So thank you for spending this time with me today. If you're in a transition or a new chapter, maybe you're building a dream or writing a story of your own, then this is exactly the work that I love exploring through Lemonaid. I offer one-to-one coaching or group sessions, explore the possibilities of what can come next. You can find more information through the link and the show notes. And if this resonated, or you think somebody else would benefit from this story, well, please do share, subscribe, and anything else that the algorithms need, because without that, this content can't reach the right people. Please let me know, what story are you currently writing? Because in every chapter, there is purpose. For now, keep making lemonade from whatever lemons you're carrying, and take care. See you soon.